Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but actually the time we're recording this video, it was bloody hot. It was like 36 degrees today. Yes, what's happening with the weather, eh? Anyway, let's get on to some crazy news stories. But before I do, can I yet again ask you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you really want to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. Those coffees really do help because, let's be honest, I'm recording this video really late. I work late. Coffees are essential. So let's get on to the first news story, and that is apparently the MK party won their first Western Cape ward. Now, before you get super excited, the only real parties actually contesting that ward was the ANC, the MK party, the EFF, and the BA. And the MK party won overwhelmingly, and it was actually in Saldanha Bay. So does this actually spell problems for the DA in the Western Cape? Not necessarily, but what it does spell problems for is the ANC in the Western Cape. Now, this comes obviously on years of declining support in the Western Cape for the ANC. And so that actually has become interesting because for those of you who don't know, in the Western Cape, there's this thing in the Western Cape called the Western Cape Independence Advocacy Group. And they're obviously advocating for basically a breakaway of the Western Cape to become a country in its own right, underneath the self-governance rules as put forward by the UN. Well, according to this group, they're going to go see Trump. They're going to see if they can get Trump to actually allow them to advocate for a split away from the rest of the republic. Now, this is actually two individuals that have now gone to Trump and requested support on breakaways. That first, obviously, being the Oranje group, who want their breakaway conclave, and now the Western Cape. Sometimes you can understand why people get really annoyed at these people who want to break up the country. Whilst the merits of breaking it up is also understood in terms of the overall decline in terms of governance in the state, does obviously raise large questions. Anyway, the president himself criticized the Cape Independence Group's plan to visit the US. Now, he didn't criticize them because they're going to speak there. He says it's the timing. And clearly the group is going there because of the timing. The timing is optimal for them to try and get support. The presidency is actually worried about that because obviously given the rising tensions between the United States and South Africa. Now, as far as the presidency is concerned, this is actually going to make their job in repairing the relationship harder. And so let's actually get on to the main set of stories today. This was actually the presidency spokesperson, Vincent, who basically briefed the media at the Union buildings in Pretoria, and he basically went through all the problems that the United States has got with South Africa in a bid to basically start attempting to fix this relationship. And the first one is he says that the relationship with Iran is not sinister. He used the whole, we're just friends with everyone and we're non-aligned speech that we've all heard many times before. The problem is that obviously South Africa is cozying up with Iran in a way that isn't necessarily non-partisan. And this idea that South Africa is being encouraged or funded by Iran remains a real thing. Now, according to Ramaphosa, the only real reason that they're friends with Iran is because Iran's part of the BRICS bloc. But that's not exactly true. Because as everybody knows, when the advocacy to get Iran into BRICS was being touted in the first place, the whole idea was to gravitate diplomatic and economic support away from the West and move towards the East. So it's very difficult for them now to backtrack that because, unfortunately, all those statements about how they obviously wanted to side with the Islamic Republic are still in the media. Now, according to the presidency, even if the US imposed sanctions against Iran, they would still take a non-partisan approach and still be friends with them. You see, this is kind of the problem because they say they're not going to hide any of their friends. And the problem is, well, sometimes you might have to, especially if you want to appease a party that you're not currently getting very well on with. Now, another comment that obviously came forward was actually the DA suggesting that the presidency needs to address its foreign policy, specifically because of the diplomatic issues being posed between Russia and as well as China and Iran, the BRICS nations, if you will. Saying that, I would personally say that it does look like the damage control with Russia is no longer needed because it does appear that Trump and Putin are managing to put the differences aside in order to agree a peace deal in Ukraine, which is long overdue. the presidency says that actually, we don't need to reset our diplomatic policy, our foreign policy, because all we're doing is we're just going through a bumpy patch with the US, and an overhaul is not needed. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, in my video yesterday, I showed you exactly what the White House had to say around their rationality for the reasons of why they were struggling with South Africa. And yes, expropriation without compensation and obviously BEU rules were in there, but so was our foreign policy. So I would say, I'm going to agree with the DA on this and say, yeah, an entire overhaul is needed. Now, the other thing that happened was obviously the president's spokesperson said that actually there wasn't currently a diplomatic crisis at all embassies around the world, because the news is out now that apparently all of our embassies are falling apart. Because you said we don't just allow our infrastructure in South Africa to fall apart, apparently we allow our infrastructure in other people's countries to fall apart by lack of investment. Specifically, in this instance, the news is that actually Singapore, the embassy there, is just going to pop. Now, Minister for the Presidency then had this to say about Rasool, the expelled ambassador to the United States.
With respect to Ambassador Rasool's imminent arrival back to South Africa, we would like to urge all political formations that are planning various homecoming rallies for Ambassador Rasool to assist us and refrain from partaking or engaging in action that may seem inflammatory and that may worsen the already volatile diplomatic relationship with the United States. And now just quickly.
Now, why this is interesting is because they clearly know that some left-wing nut jobs in their own party are going to celebrate the arrival of this individual back in the country as a celebration of some sort. Yeah, you showed the US one. The problem is they understand that these comments got the ambassador expelled, and that given the tensions, you maybe don't want to exasperate them. And so here's the ANC actually now having to walk back its approach and say, like, guys, can you be a little bit sensitive, please? So how do I know that the ANC is actually walking back some of rhetoric? And this is actually the news that obviously Durka is now having to get involved in the renaming of Santon Drive to One Terrace Place, because according to them, well, due to diplomatic sensitivities, it's a nice way of saying it, due to diplomatic sensitivities, they need to be a little bit more cautious around how they approach this. So apparently the presidency is now getting involved and saying maybe we need to let the locals decide and be a little bit more cautious and so forth and so forth. In fact, here you go. You can listen to what they had to say yourself.
Weapons. On the renaming of Santon Drive, the government is engaging with the city of Johannesburg regarding the renaming of the Santon Drive street. This is part of the needed consultation process, which is also prescribed within our statutory procedures. It further encourages a transparent process that invites the public to have a view that is expressed openly. It is also part of the intergovernmental cooperative process. As it stands, government has a historical mandate to rename the streets in South Africa to reflect and set apart the new dispensation from the old one. The renaming of streets remains one of our democratic society's redress of the past injustices of colonialism and apartheid. However, we recognize the diplomatic sensitivities around the renaming of Santon Drive, particularly with the United States of America. It is for this reason that national government, through the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, is in talks with the city of Johannesburg. The purpose of these talks is to agree a process that will allow the national executive to manage the diplomatic tensions with the United States without further inflaming the situation.
Now, if you actually listen to what they're saying, they're basically saying, we need to find a way to walk this back while still saving face, so don't do anything for it, and maybe we'll let the residents bail us out of this. Because the ANC understands full well that all this bravado and this rhetoric that they're giving in the public sometimes isn't really going to do them any favors. And so obviously now, given the diplomatic tensions and the fight back to the US, they're having to eat humble pie. And the final news story, ladies and gentlemen, is that the EMDP is striking in Johannesburg. And this actually is a very interesting story because according to the news, these individuals are striking because they want more money. And obviously the state of Gauteng is not very good. Now this becomes interesting because we have to remind ourselves that underneath the last administration, Panyaza Jufi obviously tried to bolster employment in that area by getting undesirables to do the job of a law enforcement officer. And for those of you who recall that story, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, unfortunately, he's blown the budget, and the actual law enforcement officers aren't actually getting a pay rise, or certainly not one that they would find acceptable. But then again, unions in this country, they always want the most unreasonable pay rises. 50% this year, that seems reasonable. But why this becomes interesting is that there's usually a convention right around the world that police forces are not allowed to strike. Like almost every country bans police forces from striking, and virtually every country around the world actually bans police forces from having unions for that exact reason. Because police forces are like hospitals and ambulances. They're essential services. You need to keep people there at all times. And so the idea of labor, labor relations and being able to strike for better wages and so forth, whilst that's admirable and you want that, you also need to be cautious about allowing police officers to disrupt services, because by police officer disrupting services actually opens the private citizen up to threats of crime, which could ultimately be, in some bad instances, more death. And it's so interesting because we have a Gauteng where these guys are committing crimes, they're blocking roads to get a wage increase. Only in South Africa. This is actually really, really one of those stories that I do sit back and I scratch my head and I'm like, how do we allow that to happen? Things are just really entertaining in South Africa at the moment. It seems like you don't really get a day without some kind of news that just makes you raise an eyebrow. Anyway, that's just my views. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll hear from you on Monday. Until next time, bye.